Doug, welcome to the Astroben podcast. How are you?
Good. Thanks, man, for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming on. I speak to a lot of scientists and engineers and astronauts on the podcast, but I particularly wanted to speak to you because religion doesn't really come up a lot in many of the conversations I have. So I'm really intrigued to hear your perspective on life and the universe. So maybe we could start with, where did your fascination with the cosmos start from? So let's start with the space side of things. Do you have an origin story or a moment where you looked up at the stars for the first time and thought, you know?
I guess my father, my dad, was in working for RCA, made satellites that went into space. And so when I was a little kid, he would bring me to his place of work, and I would get to see them manufacturing and building the satellites and the test rooms, and that just fascinated me. So that got me involved in electronics, And so my father had a very keen fascination in space. He did a lot of telescopes and things of that nature too, as well, in photography of outer space. And so we had pictures in our house of the moon and things he had taken. So that kind of, as a little kid, 5-year-old, 6-year-old growing up, that's what I remember. And then it just blossomed from there as I went to college, got involved with NASA and space programs that were going on with NASA. So yeah, it's always been a lifelong fascination of mine, I guess.
Fantastic. Well, before we chatted, I watched your trailer for your new book, which I'd love to talk to you about, and it's quite an uplifting introduction and sets the premise for what the book is about. So I'll put the link in the show notes, but it's basically about the big questions in the universe and how the laws of nature lead us directly to Jesus. So sort of bringing in religion, and it's got a great name, The Author of Light. Well done on a great name. Always helps with a book. So you're a Christian, and believe that God is the author of all science, maths, logic, reason, life, and love. So tell me a bit about that. How did you discover your love of God at the same time as your love of science?
Yeah, sure. So I didn't grow up in a home that was, I guess you could say, spiritual. My father and mother weren't, didn't bring us to church or anything like that. So I didn't have a background in church or any of that. But when I was a teenager, we had some friends of the family that had started to introduce us to a local church. And at this time, I was, 15 years old, very interested in physics growing up. So that's what I actually studied when I went off to college, was physics. But I was starting to study Einstein's theories of relativity, in particular special relativity, and reading his papers on the subject. And they had handed me an audio tape. You remember cassette tapes back in the day? Well, I was exploring the Bible for the first time because of our friends, and the tape had I can't remember who his name was or who he was, but he was talking about the special theory of relativity and how we can learn things about God through the special theory of relativity. So that started my segue into that whole topic. So for the next 30 years, as I went off to college and I learned more about physics and was exposed to more science, connections started coming together through Einstein's special theory of relativity. So, and this was fascinating to me because at this time when I was a teenager, I was reading the Bible for the first time, opening up Genesis, and in the first, part of it, it says that God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And the theory of special relativity starts with the physics of light. And everything is based on light in Einstein's theory of relativity. So that's the connection that resonated with me, that he was starting his whole theory around the physics of light, and the Bible starts with light. And then if you read throughout the Bible, Jesus talks about being the light of the world. God is referred to as light, many, many times throughout the Scripture. And so, you could take that sort of in a spiritual metaphor sense, that that God illuminates the world and illuminates truth, and that's sort of how people interpret those verses. He illuminates the darkness. But I was taking a more physical interpretation, literal interpretation, around the physics of light and the behavior of light. And if you look at the actual behavior of light and the characteristics of the physics of light, you find out it's very odd. There's a lot of paradoxes in the physics of light. Nothing else in the universe acts like light that we know of. And the physics of it are just incredibly quirky and counterintuitive. But if you look at all of those paradoxes and you look at all of those counterintuitive parts of light, you find out they line up perfectly. And in my book, The Author of Light, I line up 18 properties of light that line perfectly with the God that's described in the Bible. So I guess the thesis would be that when God created the physics of light, he embedded into the laws themselves a signature that basically authenticates the person who created the laws themselves. So it's his signature into the law saying there's no mistake, there's no ambiguity, there's no confusion over who created this, who created the universe, because I basically infused light and the physics of, and it's not just light, because when you look at the physics of light, it relates to the space, matter, time, and energy. So that's how Einstein formulated his theory of special relativity, which has now been proven, thousands of times through multiple experiments. But the physics of light basically then dictate everything else. Everything else falls under light. Space, matter, time, and energy are all dictated by the physics of light. And that's how he starts with his theory. It wasn't until later that he came up with his general theory of relativity. And this general theory of relativity basically is a more general case, and special is a special case of general relativity. But his first theory in 1905, which he didn't win the Nobel Prize for, which he should have, was around the physics of light and its behavior. So that's how everything started for me. And then I've just been exploring that, scientific. So science has always fascinated me since I was a kid, and I use science as a way to learn more about God.
That's so fascinating. And I suppose, in the Bible it says, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And these scriptures and these stories far outdate any modern science. So there's clearly a kind of a very strong parallel and synergy with theories like the Big Bang. I'm not smart enough to understand exactly or what we scientists think happens for the Big Bang. Well, no one has the answers. I think the James Webb Space Telescope took a picture the other day of a galaxy that was 100 million years old after the Big Bang, which makes it in the very early days. And the human mind can't comprehend how the Big Bang came into existence. So what's your personal feelings around the Big Bang? Was that an act of God? What questions should we be asking about the Big Bang and how? Yeah.
Yeah, I know there's theories out there that are questioning the validity of the Big Bang theory, and there's other theories out there. But I think most of the evidence points towards a single point in time, a long time ago, where the universe came into existence. And so, yes, I do believe God would be the instigator of that event, if it indeed did take place. It's still a theory. But, the expansion of the universe and all of that, and in the Bible, if you look, it does say that God stretches the heavens like a fabric. He stretches them, and that's in the Old Testament, that he stretches the heavens like. Back then, they didn't know anything about space-time fabric, and how it stretches, and that's exactly what's happening. It's a great analogy of what's happening, but we still don't understand dark energy, dark matter, where that comes from, or its behaviors and everything about it. It's just we see its effects, but we don't know what's causing it. And so there's still a lot of unknowns out there. Quantum gravity, they don't understand how to connect gravity to quantum field theory yet. There's still, the standard model of quantum physics works really well, but there's areas where it fails or doesn't explain fully what's happening in the universe. They don't have a connection to quantum gravity yet, a quantum field theory of gravity that works. And so there's a lot of unknowns still there. But yes, to answer your question, I think it all points back to God, creating the universe in a single instant. It says God created the heavens and the earth. And, it just kind of, from his word, from his mouth, he spoke it into existence. And if you look at the universe and how it behaves, we find out at the underlying layer of the universe is a language of sorts that's quantum physics that's sort of creating the reality we live in. It's more of a virtual, mathematical, abstract reality that's the foundation of quantum physics, which is all mathematical theory. And if you look at what the Bible says, it says that God, his word, his logos is what created the universe. So we're figuring out the universe is more created out of a language system rather than a material system. And that's also in agreement with the Bible as well.
So, Einstein was famous for not seeing any conflict between religion and science. I don't see that a lot anymore in 2022. Do you experience pushback from academia and the scientific community if you air views about a creator alongside your scientific work?
Well, I haven't personally, in the past I have. So I did go off to study biochemistry and molecular biology. That's what my PhD is in. So I got my bachelor's and master's in engineering physics, solid state physics, and then did my PhD in biochemistry. And as I got into molecular biology and started learning about the intricacies inside the cell and the three-dimensional structure of proteins and enzymes and nanomachines inside of our cells that are catalyzing all these really complex chemical reactions, I was basically floored at that. My jaw was hitting the ground every time I turned a page in my molecular biology book. These little, very sophisticated three-dimensional structures in the cell that, like machines, that create ATP or that spin the flagella of a bacterium, proton-driven motors and things of that nature. So at that point, I was questioning to my professors, because they also had this, narrative that this was all created by random chance, and selection acting on random chance to select for the best features. But I couldn't envision a pathway in my mind that could describe the complexity of the machines I was seeing in the cell and how it's all architected together into a network with hierarchy and with language and with intent and purpose, and how that could accidentally, through selection, end up with that. So I was questioning that narrative in my classes with the professors. I got a lot of pushback in school for that. But after I left school, there was really no, because I never went back into academia after that. I started a biotech company and have been in the commercial sector since then. So I don't have interaction with a lot of academics at this point where we have those kind of discussions. But I do post on social media about it. I have, I do a whole, I have a whole group that we discuss topics like this. And most people, for the most part, are very receptive to it. Even people that believe differently, like maybe they're Islam or, some other religion, they're very anxious to have discussions about God and science.
Fantastic. You mentioned you founded a biotech company. And that's looking at new drugs to combat drug-resistant forms of HIV. What specifically are you doing at the moment in that realm?
That company is no longer in existence. I did that in 2005 and 2010. So what we did there is we developed tools that help the pharmaceutical industry to discover drugs to combat HIV. So what we did is we recombinantly engineered proteins that the virus makes and drug-resistant forms of those proteins, and we stabilize them in a particular way so that it made it easier to study them, easier to develop drug compounds that would interact with those proteins. And so, so that was an offshoot from my schooling. As I was getting my biochemistry degree, I was learning a certain set of skills in the lab, and a friend of mine who was also in the program with me approached me and said, couldn't we turn this into a business? And so I went over to the School of Entrepreneurship at the school and worked with the MBA students, and we developed a business plan for it. So as soon as I graduated, I launched the company and had the investors lined up to launch it. So I didn't go into academia. I could have went and become a postdoc professor type of situation, or I was looking at going into the commercial realm, but I felt like this desire to start something of, entrepreneurial. And so I had the entrepreneurial bug back then, and got it out of my system for a little while. But it was fun. It was a fun process. I worked with a lot of really great people. I learned a lot, how to start a business, how to market what we were doing, how to develop new products, and how to sell those products. Great experience.
Absolutely. So you also founded the Institute of Polymolecular Health. Are you still doing that? And if so, I'd love to hear.
Yes.
What is polymolecular health? Because I've never heard the term before.
Yeah. So my wife got into essential oils, and she was mainly using them for making the house smell nicer instead of using artificial scented candles. And so I was trained in Western medicine. And Western medicine, I would say, is called monomolecular health. So when you buy a drug, a pharmaceutical drug, it's one specific molecule that they've designed and purified into a tablet form or some other form. It's one molecule, so it's monomolecular, one molecule. But with natural means of establishing health or increasing health, it's mainly extracts from plants, and plants have this amazing diversity in molecules that they make. They make, several orders of magnitude more chemical diversity in terms of the compounds that plants can synthesize biochemically than humans can synthesize in the lab. So like 53% of drugs that are designed by pharmaceutical companies were inspired or copied directly from a molecule found in a plant or a natural source. And that's still true today. So the last, 25 years, out of the 1,245 compounds the FDA has approved as a drug compound, around half of those came from nature and modified in some way. But it's still monomolecular therapy. They're just looking at one particular molecule the plant is producing and purifying it, synthesizing it, and recreating it. But with polymolecular health, you're basically taking in hundreds or even thousands of different molecules simultaneously, right? So a plant extract is going to have a lot more, like an essential oil, which is a plant extract. But there's other types of herbs and plant extracts that you can look at besides essential oils. But you're basically going into nature and you're extracting the hundreds or thousands of molecules that these species make, and then using that for health. And the reason that's so much more advantageous is a couple of things. One, there's less side effects. A lot of the side effects that come from westernized medicine stem from the fact that you're taking one molecule. With polymolecular therapy, you have other molecules in the mix that basically quench the negative effects of the molecule in your body. So that's one thing. The second is synergy that takes place. So synergy is like, 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2, 1 plus 1 equals 10. Or there's other synergies in polymolecular health where you have 0 plus 0 equals 10. Meaning this molecule has no activity, this molecule has no activity. You put the two together, they do something when they're combined, but neither individually could do, right? So that's a different type of synergy. So that those types of synergies take place with polymolecular health. So I do a lot of training, put a lot of courses together, and I train people and give them education around polymolecular health, how it works, the theory behind it. But I had to basically relearn, because it's stuff that we didn't learn in school, right? Like they don't teach you this when you're going to get your PhD or your medical degree. They're not teaching you these things. You're brought up in the Western mode of thinking, which is single compound therapy. So I had to rethink how I was thinking about those things, because I saw some things that happened when my wife got into it with our children and with me that kind of defied the laws of what I couldn't treat any other way. So we couldn't treat it with Western medicine, some problems with my children, and as well as problems I was having. And then when we started using some of these different plant extracts, the problems were immediately resolved. And I couldn't account for it with any kind of placebo effect, because these things weren't amenable to that, right? So once I saw a number of really strong examples, I came around and I started to re-gauge my thinking and to try to understand what was happening.
That's fascinating. It sounds kind of like the secrets that the pharmaceutical companies don't want you to know. And what's your hope for sort of bringing the education to the masses? Do you want to inspire entrepreneurs to start companies to search for new medicines that can be found in nature? Or what's other than your sort of, it came from a place of trying to find better solutions for you and your family, is there kind of a higher motivation for wanting to do this?
So basically not many people really understand this information. I didn't. So you go out to the general community, they don't understand. They might be using natural health, but don't really understand how it works. So there's a lot of stigma around it, that people think you're an snake oil salesman or something like this. So my whole motivation was to educate people so that they would know how it works. Once you understand how something works, it takes the stigma away from it. Once you see the science behind it, and there's a lot of science behind it, published in peer-reviewed journal articles, it's just that it's not brought out to light, right? So I just want to bring the education to the general masses, just average people that could learn it and understand it, and then apply it at home to their own families and their own health. But the key was trying to understand it. So I put together classes that explain the scientific basis of how all that works.
Yeah, so it sounds like you've kind of used your scientific expertise to build the business case, and then your religious background
is the
motivator.
Video-based curriculum with slides and me teaching, breaking it down into a science and teaching it. So you can sit there and watch the videos and get education.
That's awesome. This obviously is the Astroben podcast, so we have to focus on space stuff. But you were a NASA graduate, and you have worked with NASA in the past. And you've done some microgravity experiments on the shuttle. I'd love to hear about them. I've never met anyone that has done a microgravity experiment on the shuttle. So what did that involve? How did you get involved with that?
Okay, so in the early and mid 90s, NASA was very interested in learning about how to weld metal in outer space. So if you have to repair a structure in outer space, you have to melt metal and then let it re-solidify, right? But on Earth, it's a completely different process when you melt a piece of metal and let it re-solidify, because it's under the force of gravity, right? So gravity, when you have anytime you have a temperature gradient in a material, you have temperature differences across the material, and you have a gravitational field acting on that temperature gradient. Temperature gradients lead to density gradients, and then a gravitational field causes the density gradients to start convection. So in a liquid that's got a temperature distribution throughout it, you get convection currents that start to form, just like in a lake. You know, the hot water rises and the cold water sinks, right? So the same thing happens in a metal. So the question was, if you weld in outer space and you don't have these convection currents in the liquid metal, then would it affect the strength or the mechanical properties of a welded seam in outer space? And so that question got fielded out to the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, RPI, who's my alma mater, and Dr. Martin Glicksman, who was a material science professor there. And so NASA put together a program with the Lewis Space Flight Center and developed flight hardware that flew on 3 different space shuttle missions in the early and mid-90s, 95, 96, 97, on STS 62, 75, and 87. They were called the USMP 2, 3, and 4 missions. And in those missions, what they did is, what we did is we had an experiment that was in the cargo bay of the space shuttle. It was fully self-contained and fully automated. We controlled it from a control center on Earth. It was the first time in history that NASA had controlled an experiment from an off-site control center. So we issued commands to the experiment, and it was called the isothermal dendritic growth experiment was the name of the experiment. Basically, it was as a chamber filled with liquid material that was melted, and then we formed tiny crystals called dendrites in the liquid by supercooling the liquid below its melting point, and then nucleating crystal growth in the center of the liquid and letting that crystal grow into the liquid. Now, if you did that in a metal, you wouldn't be able to see into the liquid to see this crystal growing, and the temperature would be so high that it would be dangerous to do on the space shuttle. So what we did is we designed an experiment that used an organic polymer called succinonitrile that was clear, but the physico-chemical properties of succinonitrile match that very well of metal. So what we were learning in this system, we could apply directly to what would happen in a metal. Okay, so it was see-through. We could see through it, so we could take photographs and videos using high-powered lenses to magnify the crystal, and all that data was telemetered down to the control center. And so my involvement was I developed the software that analyzed the imagery in real time and calculated the profile of the crystals, the velocity, the radius of curvature of the growing crystal tip, and we extracted all that information mathematically, and then we compared that information to the mathematical theories that describe metal crystallization, right, on Earth. Now we didn't have gravity as part of the equation, which clouded our ability to be able to understand if the theories were correct, right? So when we removed gravity, the only thing we were left with was diffusion, and from there we could actually compare with the basic theory, was it correct? And the data, we were actually writing the journal article papers before the space shuttle landed. It was a 2-week thing. We already had all the data from the experiment. We had controlled it for 2 weeks. And because of our software and things we had developed, we were able to extract all the data from the imagery before the space shuttle landed. And we were able to compare it to theory, and we found out at very low supercoolings levels, meaning you're bringing the temperature well below the melting point of the liquid, that the theory deviated from what was really happening. So the theoretical models were all adjusted after that. But I also did an experiment on the Vomit Comet, which is the DC-9 the astronauts train on. So I got to fly on that. I developed hardware that flew on the DC-9 Vomit Comet, and we actually did low gravity experiments on that that were actually in metal. So we did that in stainless steel, and we actually melted steel, single crystals of steel, which we grew. We actually grew single crystals of steel that were, you ever see the semiconductor manufacturing? Probably they make semiconductors. They make them into these huge bowls of single crystals, and then they slice them. Well, we were doing that with metals. So we were growing single crystals of metal, stainless steel, slicing it into discs, and then in the Vomit Comet, we had a device we designed that would basically melt the metal right in the center of the disc, and we had cameras watching. And then we would measure the rate at which it re-solidified under low gravity. Now, in the Vomit Comet, you only get 30 seconds of low gravity, and then you get 2 minutes of high gravity. You get 2 minutes of two times the force of gravity, and then you get 30 seconds of 0G, basically. And so it's basically a parabolic maneuver the plane does over and over. So you get 30 seconds low gravity, 2 minutes high gravity. And so during those high gravity moments, we were all saying who could do as many push-ups as they could, because they were twice as heavy. How many push-ups can you do when you're? So that was fun. But also you had to take scopolamine to keep yourself from vomiting on the flight, which did a number on your head, because scopolamine is a little bit psychoactive, but but everything, the experiment was fully self-contained. So by the time we were flying, all I had to do was, when the low gravity light went on, I just had to hit a button and the experiment would do what it was supposed to do. It was fully automated, and then we collected the samples and analyzed them after the flight. And there was a lot of noticeable differences between welds made in outer, in a low gravity environment as compared to gravitational environment.
Absolutely.
So yeah. So that and I actually wanted to be an astronaut at one point, but then life happened. Things went in a different direction. But it's always been a dream of mine to be in space.
Well, I would make the point that you can still be an astronaut. With the advent of space tourism, you could find a way to get into orbit if you so desire. But it's been great chatting to you. You're an inspiration for all sorts of ways. I thought I'd just ask you before you go, because you've got a good following on Twitter, and you've recently tweeted why you want to remain on Twitter, or why you use Twitter, to learn from others, to share with others things you believe to be true, and to connect with the global community in real time, which I thought was really succinct. But I thought maybe, what else could Twitter do, just because everyone's talking about Twitter at the moment, to spread the word of science and God? If you had Elon Musk's ear, what would you say? How could Twitter promote and positively the word of science and God?
No, that's a great question. I hadn't considered before. I guess I got frustrated with Twitter last couple of years because of all the censorship that was occurring. That happened to me and a lot of other people. I know a lot of people that had their whole 250,000 followers on Twitter, and then wake up the next day their whole count was gone, and they were just sharing scientific information. They weren't posting anything illegal, you would consider illegal. And so that was very frustrating. I had to do sort of a dance around what I posted, because I was at risk of losing everything. So I guess just having an open forum where people can discuss things legally, of course everyone wants to be legal, and you don't want hate speech, or that kind of thing. But just talking about science in general, or God in general, without the fear of being censored or canceled, would be nice.
I completely agree.
If they could just promise that would be perfect. If Elon Musk could make that happen, I think he would have been successful. But I feel like he's getting pressured now to conform to the whole censorship model, but I don't know how far he's going to go with it.
Super interesting. Let's see. Doug, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben.